God in my head, God in my heart, God on my lips I pray. Amen.
Amen.
The wind blows where it chooses. We know that the wind blows. We know that we hear these words. But with what are we listening? That's what Jesus tries to get us to see over and over again. How are we listening? Where are the words falling? Where is the Spirit landing? How is the Spirit moving you? Us. Listening with our hearts is very different than with our ears. If you're wondering what to do with these lessons this morning, think of the stories from your own past, or as I said before, your friends. How was your situation transformed by these words at one time or another? How have your friends been transformed? Or what is it you're seeking today? What did you come here for? Why has God called you here? Telling and hearing the stories, we are transformed. The story from Genesis. We hear about Abram. And if you were a little bit confused about hearing about Abraham later on, remembering that Abram was the person who listened to God. God told him to take all of his family and his livestock, etc., and just leave his home and go to another land. So Abram did. Abram is the one that was faithful, that followed, not knowing where he was going to go, not knowing what he was going to do. And later, God changed his name from Abram to Abraham, the one who followed him. Abram went searching for security, actually. He went with his livestock and his family, yes, but those promises for all human beings. A place to procreate, a place to make money and establish a line, a reputation. Milan Kundera, in The Unbearable Lightness of Being, puts it this way: the goals we pursue are always veiled. A girl who longs for marriage longs for something she knows nothing about. The boy who hankers after fame has no idea what fame is. The thing that gives our every move its meaning is always totally unknown to us. What is it that pulls your heart? Why do you do one thing or another? What will it be that calls you out of your comfort zone, out of your routine, your everydayness, that will transform your life and witness to God? In the lesson from Romans today, Paul struggles with that relationship between faith and works. Paul, he used to be Saul. His life was very different. He could not have planned the transformation that took place in his life. God knocking him off a horse, blinding him, telling him to go somewhere, a place where he couldn't even get to without help from others. He was not a person that was used to taking help from others. He was the leader. He was the crusader. He was the one that was going to murder anyone who tried to change the establishment. Paul, the one we listen to today. Does the end justify the means? Well, in Jesus' case, that was not a negative thing, was it? Usually when we say, does the end justify the means, we're usually talking about people who break the law in order to make something good come true, or the other way around. And we usually think of it as a negative sort of thing, using it as a weapon. But Jesus and Paul were Jews. Paul was not yet thinking that Jesus was the high and holy one. He was not proposing that faith and worship of Jesus would bring reconciliation of one to God. Paul, when he was writing these letters, was simply speaking of the person that he had heard about, that had lived and died as one of us, that had suffered, that had persevered in telling the truth, that had persevered in changing people's lives, not knowing what would happen later on. And the Jews did what was necessary under the law, as Paul spoke. But he recognized that for those who were not Jews and not under the law, then there could be no sin because they didn't know that it was a sin. You get that reasoning? If you don't know it's a sin, then it's not a sin. That's what the Jews believed. That's what we believe. That God doesn't condemn you until you know better. And that's what Paul was talking about today in these lessons. And the irony is that whoever he was talking to had to be transformed at these words because they now knew what was right and what was wrong, according to Jesus. And if they were going to persist in their old ways simply because they were comfortable, now they had to atone for that. Fulfilling the law could be done by anyone. It was faith in the rest. The faith was their motivating factor for living the rest of life. That's what made them Christ followers. You see, they changed Jesus into the Christ, the Holy, the God. How was that transformation made? It wasn't made by an edict in some back room. It was made by experience. People living, hearing, doing. You see, the works. Abraham could believe all he wanted that God was talking to him, but if he hadn't walked the path and done the work that was needed, we wouldn't have our stories today. Saul could have been knocked off his horse, brought to that room, been visited by the disciples, and ignored them. He would still be Saul. He was transformed by his faith and then going out to preach to other people and living the life. Jesus went beyond the law, as did Abraham, as did Paul. Jesus called it the fulfillment of the law. He was practical. Jesus was leading those people as he leads us today, out of the life we knew and into what we don't know. And yet our faith brings us to a new place. Every day when you get up, you end up in a new place if you recognize it. In Matthew's stories, we're confronted there. There's the word. There's the deed, right there. Make no mistake, this one says. What is transformation? What does born again mean? Our wonderful Nicodemus, stealthy, going to Jesus by night. He knew something was going on. He knew Jesus was the person. He knew Jesus was more than the eye could take in. But he wasn't ready to change his life yet, so he sneaked out by night, seeing this man that he would have been condemned for talking to during the day. So by night he goes and he sneaks in and he gets an audience with Jesus. He's in turmoil. He's wondering what's happening in his heart. What's going on? Does he trust it? Has nothing to do with his own will. He's being pulled. He's being called. Somehow, his faithfulness, his prayers are being invaded by a message. Something else. something this man is saying and doing. The author of Matthew is recalling Isaiah 42. Israel was called to bring God's justice to the rest of the world. It's that first story that we have. The suffering servant stories, we call them. In Matthew 17, the Jews are called upon to renew their faith and works, to enlist the help of the rest of the world. The world as they knew it, not just their own people. That's what they were used to. Convincing their own group that it was right, and then doing it against all odds. But they had each other. Now, they're to enlist the help of the world to bring God's justice to light. Even then, their works were in response to God's law. Nicodemus has trouble with changing his whole life, and yet here, we're upholding him. Response to God's law. Jesus would tell us over and over that the letter of the law wasn't enough. That it was the spirit of the law, the deeper part, the part that makes us human. You know, I was reflecting on this and thinking about myself and how easy it is for me to follow the thou shalt nots. You know, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet. So when I think about somebody else's thing, I can immediately cut myself off. Oh, that's wrong. I know that's wrong. That's written in the Bible, right? That's the law. And yet, how about the shalls? Thou shalt love one another. Thou shalt share everything you have with others. A lot harder. We need to sit down with a piece of paper and a pencil, and we need to write down all of those little qualifications about how much I'll share, or who I'll love, or if they'll just change one thing about them, then I can love them. It's easy not to murder, but what about murdering in my heart? It's not easy, and that's not what we're called to. Thich Nhat Hanh says, there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. There is no way to enlightenment. Enlightenment is the way. There is no way to liberation. Liberation is the way. He's not so different from Jesus. He's just another one that heard and sees and lives the message. There's no rule book that can take us to the promised land. It all takes mindfulness and works. The works are not in order to be justified. The works are the fruits of our faithful selves, our faithful hearts, our belief in the end product. We have Abraham, we have Paul, we have Nicodemus, we have Jesus. The whole point is we can read these words and study them all our lives, but if we wait for the proof that they're right, that they will work, then we will never even glimpse the kingdom, never mind get there. If we're too busy waiting to be justified in our beliefs, then the world will swallow us whole. There will be no proof that we were here. The works that we must do are like jumping into a marriage faithfully. Like doing the work that we're called to do and seeing the end product 20 or 30 or 59 years later. There is no proof. You cannot garner proof that what you are going to do is going to make the world better. But if it is in the Spirit that calls you, then it will be the proof you need. The only way we can drink this in, the only way we can be empowered by God, by Jesus, is to live it, is to listen, is to then go out and against all odds, live it. This is our Lenten journey. Welcome on the journey together. Amen.